Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a concept that is, I think, rapidly becoming the single most valuable professional superpower in our modern economy.
Absolutely.
It's called deep work.
Yeah.
And our mission today is to take a stack of sources, primarily centered on Cal Newport's really powerful analysis,
Right.
and arm you with the knowledge to gain an undeniable professional edge in this hyper-distracted world we all live in.
It's such a critical mission because we are facing this stark contrast, really. The economy now demands elite, hard-to-replicate performance,
Right.
but the ambient culture, the constant notifications, the open plan offices, the pressure to always be available,
Yeah.
it all encourages this nonstop, low-value distraction.
Yeah, that constant hum of digital noise.
Exactly. So we're exploring how the few who resist this cultural current, who actually swim against the stream, are setting themselves up to not just survive, but to really thrive.
Okay, let's unpack this with the core definitions, because I
Yeah.
think we need a clear dividing line between what is truly valuable and what is, for lack of a better term, just busy work.
Yeah.
So let's start with the concept itself, deep work. What are we actually talking about when we use that term?
Deep work, at its heart, is any professional activity that's performed in a state of distraction-free concentration.
Okay, so no distractions.
None. And it has to push your cognitive capabilities to their absolute limit. Think of it as intellectual heavy lifting.
I like that.
If you are doing true deep work, the efforts you make are creating new, undeniable value, they are improving your specific skill set, and maybe most importantly, they are extremely difficult for anyone else or any machine to replicate or automate.
That makes sense. It's the unique intellectual output that requires your full, focused brain power. But if that's the ideal, what fills the vast majority of our professional days?
That would be shallow work.
Right.
Shallow work encompasses all those tasks that are, well, non-cognitively demanding. They're logistical in style, and you can often perform them successfully even while you are distracted.
So multitasking is fine for shallow work.
It is. I mean, these tasks tend not to create much new, lasting value, and they are incredibly easy to outsource or replicate.
So we're talking about that endless tide of administrative tasks.
Yes.
When I spend, say, 2 hours just clearing my inbox, triaging emails, scheduling a few meetings, and maybe glancing at a few documents that don't require heavy lifting, that's the epitome of shallow work, isn't it?
Absolutely. You become what Cal Newport calls a human network router.
It's a human network router.
Yeah, constantly sending and receiving these little digital packets, ensuring information flows around the company, but never actually generating new information or advancing a truly hard problem yourself.
And it feels like many, many knowledge workers can spend 70 or even 80% of their day operating in exactly that router mode.
It's a huge problem.
That immediately hits home, that feeling that you're busy, running at full speed all day long. But when you look at your output, the needle hasn't actually moved on the project that truly matters. And that realization that shallow work consumes more than just your time, it feels like it actually degrades our capacity for the deep stuff later.
It does. It absolutely does. The writer Nicholas Carr, he was reflecting on this shift to the networked age, and he admitted that the net seemed to be, in his words, chipping away my capacity for concentration and contemplation.
So we're literally losing the ability to go deep, even when we want to.
We are, and this brings us directly to the foundational argument that drives this entire discussion. It's called the deep work hypothesis.
Okay, and what does that hypothesis tell us about our professional future?
Well, it's both a prediction and a warning. It states that the ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare at exactly the same time it is becoming increasingly valuable in our economy.
So supply is going down while demand is going up.
Precisely. And the consequence of that is crystal clear. The few individuals who recognize this reality, who ruthlessly cultivate the skill, and who make intense focus the very core of their working life will absolutely thrive and command disproportionate rewards.
And this commitment to isolation and intense focus isn't some quirky modern trend, invented in Silicon Valley.
Not at all.
You can look at history and see that many of the most impactful thinkers actively sought to engineer isolation into their lives, not as a luxury, but as a necessary precondition for their breakthrough work.
Exactly. The example of Carl Jung is perfect. By 1922, Jung was trying to establish analytical psychology. He was trying to carve out this intellectual territory separate from Sigmund Freud's dominance at the time.
And Freud was a giant in the field.
A giant. And Jung was a busy clinician in Zurich, but he desperately needed these extended periods of deep thought that his city life just wouldn't permit.
So he took this radical step. He bought land near Lake Zurich and started building a stone retreat. He called it the Tower.
Mm-hmm.
And the research shows this was far from some comfortable escape, wasn't it?
Oh, no. It was a brutal tool for self-enforcement. He built it himself, stone by stone, and he did it without electricity. His daily ritual there was incredibly strict.
What did that look like?
He would rise at 7 a.m. and spend 2 hours of completely undistracted writing time in his private office.
Okay.
And this was a room he designed to be accessed only with a key that he kept on his person at all times. No one was allowed in without his explicit permission.
He wasn't taking a vacation. He was building a cognitive fortress.
That's a great way to put it.
He understood that to advance his field, to really take on Freud, he needed to engage with problems that demanded maximum cognitive intensity and that required silence and this kind of ritualized solitude.
And that commitment to isolation is a recurring theme among high-impact thinkers. You can look at Michel de Montaigne, the 16th century essayist.
Right.
He set up his primary workspace in a private library high up in the southern tower guarding his French chateau. Or Mark Twain.
The shed.
The shed, exactly. He wrote much of the adventures of Tom Sawyer in a shed so isolated from the main house that his family had to literally blow a horn to call him for meals. The physical separation was completely non-negotiable for their elite output.
What's fascinating is seeing this trend continue right into the modern age, even when the technological temptations are, everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Woody Allen, between 1969 and 2013, wrote and directed 44 films. That is an astonishing rate of artistic productivity.
It's incredible.
And he did all of it on a German Olympia SM3 manual typewriter.
Yeah.
He completely removed himself from the electronic distractions that could fragment his thought process.
And then there's J.K. Rowling. During the period she was writing the later, most complex Harry Potter novels, she was famously absent from social media.
She was a ghost online?
A total ghost.
Yeah.
And when her team finally launched a Twitter account for her in 2009, her very first tweet for the first year and a half summarized her priority. It said, "This is the real me, but you won't be hearing from me often, I'm afraid, as pen and paper is my priority at the moment."
So she explicitly sacrificed that shallow engagement for the deep work of creating a world.
She did. And even in the heart of the tech world, the people who build this technology often reject it to produce their best work. Neil Stephenson, the acclaimed cyberpunk author, is notorious for being almost impossible to reach electronically.
And what's his reasoning for that?
It's entirely practical. He says if he organizes his life in a way that he gets lots of long, consecutive, uninterrupted time chunks, he can write these complex, world-spanning novels.
Right.
But if he is constantly interrupted, what replaces the novel? As he put it, what replaces it is a bunch of email messages that I have sent out to individual persons.
So he sees the cost of fragmentation not just as lost time, but as lost potential, the novel that never gets written.
Exactly. And then there is the ultimate corporate example of this kind of intellectual monasticism, Bill Gates's Think Weeks.
Right. These were legendary at Microsoft.
They were. Gates would conduct these twice a year, isolating himself, often in a lakeside cottage, with nothing but books, internal company reports, and his own thoughts for 5 to 7 days straight.
So no email, no calls.
None. His sole focus was deep, strategic reading and synthesis. And this practice, which some people dismissed as this eccentric luxury, was profoundly effective.
It produced the Internet tidal wave memo, didn't it?
It did. In 1995, that memo fundamentally shifted Microsoft's entire strategy toward the Internet, ensuring their survival and, their dominance in the coming decades. This commitment to depth, whether it's historical or corporate, is clearly foundational to generating world-changing results.
So deep work is clearly necessary for high-level output. But let's zoom out a bit and analyze why this skill is not just professionally advantageous, but economically essential right now. This brings us to what's often called the great restructuring of our economy.
We are living through a really profound economic shift, one described eloquently by economists like Brynjolfsson and McAfee, and also Tyler Cowen.
And what's driving it?
The shift is driven by two main forces: intelligent machines, so think AI, advanced algorithms, and ubiquitous communication, meaning global networking and the ease of outsourcing.
This restructuring is essentially automating and outsourcing mediocre human jobs at an accelerating pace.
It is.
As machines become more intelligent, the gap between what a human can do and what a machine can do in routine, logistical, or even simple data analysis just shrinks.
And it creates a starkly bimodal economic trajectory. On one end, you have jobs requiring routine cognitive effort, and they're being driven down in value or eliminated entirely.
And on the other end.
On the other end, you have jobs that require true cognitive depth and creativity, and those are seeing skyrocketing demand and compensation.
So the crucial question for anyone listening is, how do we make absolutely sure we land on the lucrative side of that divide?
To succeed in this new economy, there are two core accessible abilities you absolutely must cultivate. They are the twin engines of success in the age of intelligent machines.
Okay, what are they?
The first is the ability to quickly master hard things, and the second is the ability to produce at an elite level in terms of both quality and speed.
And deep work is the engine that fuels both of those.
It is the one thing that powers both.
Let's look at mastering hard things first, because often the quickest route to high value is mastering a skill that few other people possess. We have a powerful, real-life example of a knowledge worker who was forced to make this pivot. Jason Ben.
Ben's story is incredible. He was a financial consultant, making what looked like a decent living, but he had this brutal realization that his professional value was, well, non-existent.
What was his job?
His job involved manually manipulating these huge sets of data in Excel spreadsheets to produce reports. It was a 6-hour process he repeated constantly.
Okay, in his moment of crisis, what happened?
He realized he could automate the vast majority of his core responsibilities using a basic Excel macro.
Oh, wow.
A 6-hour manual slog was reduced to literally a single button click. The devastating insight for him was that his main professional skills could be entirely captured and executed by a simple script. He was, for all intents and purposes, functionally obsolete.
That's a terrifying thought. I mean, many of us probably realize parts of our jobs could be automated, but we often don't take action. Ben went all in.
He did. He quit his $40,000 a year job, moved back home with his parents, and dedicated himself to becoming a computer programmer, a hard, complex skill he had zero prior experience with.
And this is where the deep work training really began for him.
It did. Like most knowledge workers, he was addicted to distraction. He admitted he spent up to 98% of his time surfing the web in his old job.
Wow.
So to acquire a completely new, highly complex skill quickly, he knew he had to teach his mind how to focus intensely. And his method was extreme, but it was perfectly tailored for depth.
How extreme are we talking?
He locked himself in a room for 5 or more disconnected hours every single day. And crucially, he did this with no computer connected to the internet. He used only textbooks, note cards, and a highlighter.
So no tinkering on Stack Overflow.
No tinkering. He was engaged in true, deliberate, distraction-free learning.
And that focused intensity, it paid off dramatically.
Right. It did. He excelled at the notoriously rigorous Dev Boot Camp, where only about half the students even graduated on time. He then landed a high-paying developer job in San Francisco, paying $100,000 a year, and now he works closely with intelligent systems. His story confirms that deep work is not merely a soft skill, it is the skill required to rapidly acquire other hard skills.
And the mechanism for why this works, why deep work accelerates learning, is rooted firmly in neuroscience, right? It's not just about spending more hours, it's about spending them correctly.
That's right. When you are learning complex systems like, say, the statistical analysis software data or database languages like SQL, you can't just stumble your way to mastery. It requires what's called deliberate practice, a term pioneered by K. Anders Ericsson.
And Ericsson was very specific about what deliberate practice requires, wasn't he?
Very. He emphasized that mastering cognitively demanding tasks requires intense, uninterrupted concentration. His famous dictum was that diffused attention is almost antithetical to the focused attention required by deliberate practice.
So if your attention is scattered, your practice isn't deliberate, it's just muddling through.
It's just muddling. And this brings us to the physical basis of why focus is so essential for learning, the myelin mechanism. This is a concept that truly grounds the need for intensity.
Okay, break that down for us.
So think of your brain's neural circuits as a complicated electrical grid or maybe a network of dirt roads. When you intensely focus on a specific skill, let's say learning to parse SQL, you isolate and repeatedly fire the specific neural circuit responsible for that skill.
Okay.
This focused, repetitive use triggers the growth of a substance called myelin.
And myelin acts like what in this electrical system?
It acts like a high-grade plastic insulator, like the sheathing you'd see around a copper wire. It's a fatty tissue that wraps itself around the axons of the neurons. And this insulation allows the circuit to fire faster, cleaner, and more reliably. It effectively cements the skill into your long-term automatic memory pathways.
I like the analogy of upgrading dirt roads to superhighways.
It's a perfect analogy. Intense focus builds and insulates the cognitive highway for that specific skill. Now, here is the critical part. If you are concentrating poorly, if you're distracted, checking email,
Right.
you are firing too many circuits simultaneously. You're trying to insulate the whole neighborhood at once. This makes the myelination haphazard and ineffective,
So low concentration means low quality insulation.
which results in slow, messy skill acquisition. To learn quickly, you must focus intensely without distraction.
That leads us perfectly into the second core ability for success, producing at an elite level in terms of both quality and speed.
Mm-hmm.
The formula here is almost deceptively simple, but it's incredibly powerful. High-quality work produced equals time spent, multiplied by intensity of focus.
And most people, I think, try to maximize the time spent factor. They work 50, 60, 70 hours a week.
The brute force
The
method.
brute force method.
Yeah.
But true high performers maximize the intensity of focus factor. That is the shortcut to peak elite output.
And we see this played out perfectly in the career of Adam Grant, who became the youngest full professor at Wharton. His production rate is just legendary.
It is. 7 major articles in 2012, plus a best-selling book shortly after. It's an incredible pace.
So how did he maximize his focus intensity?
His entire strategy revolves around radical batching and forced isolation. He realized that switching between teaching, administrative tasks, and deep research just killed his intensity.
So what did he do?
He stacks all of his teaching and shallow administrative duties into one semester. That allows him to dedicate the entire other semester to distraction-free research and writing.
That's a major restructuring of his life, but he also applies this philosophy on a smaller scale, even within that research semester.
He does. He takes what he calls monastic binges, lasting 2 to 4 days at a time. During these periods, he puts an out-of-office autoresponder on his email,
Even when he's in the office.
even when he is physically present in his office. He uses technology to enforce non-availability, ensuring he maintains strict isolation until a major deep task, like completing a full draft of a paper, is done. He ensures he never enters the office feeling fragmented.
This brings up a concept that explains why Adam Grant's radical approach is so necessary. It's the devastating effect of something called attention residue.
Yes.
This idea, from researcher Sophie Leroy, explains the real cost of micro-switching.
Attention residue is the cognitive drag that occurs when you switch from task A to task B. A residue of your thoughts remains stuck on the original task. Even if you've moved on physically, your brain is still partially processing the unresolved questions of task A, and that dampens your performance on task B.
So let's make this hyper-relatable. I'm writing a complex proposal, that's task B, but I take a 2-minute break to quickly glance at my inbox, task A. What happens in my brain?
Well, if you see an email that has a difficult subject line, say, urgent, Project X funding pulled,
Yep.
and you don't respond to it, you've introduced a secondary, unresolved task into your working memory. When you immediately switch back to your complex proposal, your mind is still subconsciously struggling with the anxiety and the complexity of that funding email.
So even though I didn't spend 5 minutes drafting a reply, the residue of that unfinished, difficult task now acts like cognitive sludge.
Exactly. It's slowing down your high-quality thinking on the proposal.
And the residue gets thicker if the switch was quick, and especially if the original task was left unresolved or difficult.
Precisely. Those quick glances at the inbox throughout the day are a form of professional self-sabotage because they constantly introduce new residues, systematically degrading the intensity of focus you can bring to the deep work that actually creates value. Deep work, these extended periods with full, distraction-free concentration, it's the only way to optimize performance and prevent this cognitive drag.
So deep work is undeniably valuable and essential for professional success. But we have a genuine paradox here.
We do.
We look at the corporate landscape today, and we see all these business trends that seem actively designed to prevent deep work from happening. Why is this high-value skill so incredibly rare?
It's the scarcity paradox in action. In theory, companies should be doing everything they can to maximize the conditions for deep work, given its impact on innovation and output.
But in reality,
In reality, we see massive organizations like Facebook and Square prioritizing open office plans, packing thousands of employees onto these single, often chaotic floors, and the stated goal, as Jack Dorsey once claimed, is promoting serendipity.
but the operational reality is just constant distraction and interruption.
It is. I mean, neuroscience research consistently shows that open offices lead to lower concentration, higher stress, and a measurable decrease in complex thinking. But companies prioritize this vague idea of constant, easy interaction, the serendipity over the measurable output loss.
We also see the proliferation of instant communication, Slack, Teams, you name it,
Yes.
where the efficient employee is often configuring alerts to flash so they can instantly jump over, type a quick thought, and jump back to what they were doing. They might call it agile communication.
But it's a constant self-interruption mechanism. And then there's the pervasive cultural pressure on almost all content producers, journalists, academics, novelists, marketers, to maintain an active social media presence.
Right.
They're forced to interrupt their deep thinking diving into complicated sources, crafting nuanced arguments to participate in what one source called the frothy back and forth of online tittering.
George Packer, the esteemed New Yorker staff writer, he captured the personal fear of this forced participation. He admitted, Twitter is crack for media addicts. I'm afraid I'd end up letting my son go hungry.
Wow.
He recognized the addictive, fragmenting power of shallow communication and the threat it posed to his ability to produce meaningful, deep journalism.
So the question remains, if deep work is so economically valuable, why are businesses systematically embracing behaviors that destroy it? The answer often lies in the lack of clear measurement, what we can call the metric black hole.
Explain that. Why can't a company just measure the output difference?
Because knowledge work, unlike manufacturing where you can just count widgets per hour, lacks clear objective metrics for individual contribution. It is incredibly difficult to quantify the exact economic value of a profound, deep insight gained during 2 hours of solitude.
Or the actual dollar cost of being distracted 4 times in 1 hour.
Exactly. We have a great example of someone who tried to penetrate that black hole. Tom Cochran, the CTO of Atlantic Media. He attempted to calculate the true cost of email for his company.
And how did he even start?
It was a Herculean effort. He gathered company-wide statistics on average, typing speeds, reading speeds, and employee salaries. And after this painstaking calculation, he concluded that Atlantic Media was spending well over $1 million a year just to pay people to process emails.
$1 million.
Yeah. Every single message sent or received cost the company around 95 cents in labor costs.
That's a tangible number, but I can see the problem.
Well,
It only measures the time spent, not the cost of the interruption itself.
precisely. The outcome of that calculation was fungible. It couldn't separate the necessary value produced by one critical email from the massive cost of the distraction caused by the 99 other emails that were just noise.
So because the bottom line impact of these depth-destroying behaviors is so difficult to measure objectively, they fall into this metric black hole, allowing these destructive habits to just persist without correction.
Management can't fix what it can't quantify.
And this vacuum of data is immediately filled by the next phenomenon, the principle of least resistance.
This is a fundamental human tendency. In the absence of clear, difficult, bottom-line feedback like, if you check email, your productivity drops by 30% and you lose the company $10,000, the default behavior is always the one that's easiest in the moment.
So why does the culture of constant connectivity persist, even when we all suspect it hurts our long-term output?
Because it's easier to be constantly connected than it is to plan. If you know you can get an immediate answer to a question via Slack or IM, you save yourself the immediate, painful discomfort of having to plan ahead, organize your thoughts, or prepare resources in advance.
You prioritize short-term convenience over long-term deep scheduling.
Yes. And this leads directly to inbox centricity, running your entire day out of your email or Slack inbox.
It's the path of least resistance.
It is. It's much easier to simply react to the latest thing that lands in your queue than it is to deploy a thoughtful, multi-step methodology for setting your priorities, like the complex 15-element flowchart that makes up the Getting Things Done methodology. Thoughtful, proactive planning is hard. Quick, reactive response is easy.
And we also see this principle play out brutally in low-effort communication.
The dreaded thoughts email. That is the classic example. It takes the sender only seconds to type and send, and it temporarily clears the task from their cognitive slate.
But it externalizes all the effort.
It does. It forces the recipient to spend minutes or hours working toward a coherent, structured response. The principle of least resistance favors the sender's momentary ease over the recipient's valuable concentration.
So when you put the metric black hole together with the principle of least resistance, you get this highly visible cultural manifestation, busyness as a proxy for productivity.
This is a regression to industrial age thinking. In the factories of the industrial age, productivity was easy to observe. You could see the widgets coming off the line.
Right.
But in ambiguous knowledge work, visibility becomes a subconscious substitute for genuine value. Since deep, tangible outcomes are often difficult to quantify quickly, people revert to indicators that show they're doing stuff.
So the constant meeting scheduling, the checking email at 10 p.m., the immediate IM response, these are all performance rituals.
They are. These behaviors make one seem busy and, by cultural default, productive, even if they are objectively counterproductive to actual high-value output.
And this pressure to be constantly visible means that deep work, which is by definition invisible because you are isolated and concentrating, is viewed with suspicion.
It is. Contrast this with Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist.
Okay.
Because Feynman had absolute clarity his value was doing real good physics work, he famously practiced what he called active irresponsibility.
Active irresponsibility.
He would refuse to serve on committees, avoid administrative duties, and essentially reject anything that threatened his long, solid length of time for concentration. Clarity about what truly matters provides perfect clarity about what should be ruthlessly ignored.
Yet, modern CEOs have sometimes gone the opposite direction. Marissa Mayer at Yahoo, for instance, once punished employees for not signing in remotely enough.
Right.
She was essentially signaling that if you're not visibly busy, she would assume you are not productive.
That behavior reinforces the busyness proxy. It's a commitment to these anachronistic indicators, protected by the lack of clear metrics, which allows objectively counterproductive behavior like being tethered to a digital umbilical cord to thrive.
Finally, we need to address the cultural pressure that underlies all of this, the technopoly Uber ideology.
Neil Postman warned that our society was sliding into a relationship with technology where we assume that if a method or tool is high-tech, it is automatically necessary and good, regardless of its trade-offs.
We stopped asking, is this the best way to achieve my goal?
And started asking, how can I integrate the newest tool?
And this slide was drastically accelerated by the rise of the internet, which the writer of Getting Morozov characterizes as having become an Uber ideology.
Exactly. To embrace all things internet is seen as being relevant, modern, and forward-thinking. The alternative, opting out, choosing slowness, or building a cognitive fortress, is often ridiculed or feared because it makes one feel, as Postman warned, invisible and therefore irrelevant.
This helps explain why someone like Alyssa Rubin, a serious foreign correspondent whose value lies in crafting nuanced, deep investigations, is urged by her employer, the New York Times, to interrupt her work constantly to provide shallow content for Twitter.
It's not an empirical decision, it's a cultural compulsory action. They are valuing visibility and perceived relevance over the quality of the journalism itself.
The power of this ideology is so strong that when novelist Jonathan Franzen suggested that novelists shouldn't tweet, he was widely ridiculed.
He was seen as rejecting this unassailable norm.
It's the ultimate example of sacrificing depth for immediate, shallow participation. The irony peaks when you see a refrigerated logistics company, the very definition of an old-school analog industry affixing "like us" on Facebook to the back of their trucks. Deep work struggles not because it's difficult, but because its core values, craftsmanship, mastery, and isolation, are so easily exiled in favor of the shiny, urgent thrum of high-tech distraction. We've firmly established that deep work is economically valuable and professionally rare. But its importance, I think, transcends the balance sheet. Let's delve into why cultivating this skill is profoundly meaningful on a personal level. Why does deep work make us happier?
We can start by connecting deep work to the ancient concept of craftsmanship, and we can move beyond the knowledge economy entirely for a moment. Consider the example of Rick Furr,
The blacksmith
who dedicates his life to recreating ancient Viking-era swords.
That work requires absolute, uncompromising depth. A tiny slip in concentration, a moment of fragmented thought, and hours of effort and very expensive material are ruined instantly.
But he finds immense meaning and satisfaction in that demanding process. He describes the labor of shaping the metal. You have to nudge it, slowly it breaks down, and you start to enjoy it.
It echoes a profound human truth. The satisfactions of manifesting oneself concretely in the world through manual competence are known to make a person quiet and easy.
Right. In knowledge work, however, that connection often feels lost amid the ambiguity.
So how do we prove that connection between deep focus and satisfaction in the abstract world of knowledge work? We can start with the neurological argument for satisfaction, based on the work of Winifred Gallagher.
Gallagher began her research after a cancer diagnosis, and she developed the strong intuition that our inner state is less about what happens to us and more about where we place our focus. Our external circumstances are secondary to our sustained attention.
And her research confirms that our brains literally construct our worldview based on what we pay attention to.
Yes.
So if I focus intensely on my neighbor's annoying loud music, my experience of the afternoon is irritation.
Hmm.
But if I shift my focus intensely to solving a challenging coding problem, my experience of the afternoon is satisfaction and progress, even though the external noise hasn't changed at all.
She summarized it perfectly. Who you are, what you think, feel, and do, what you love, is the sum of what you focus on.
So therefore, if you dedicate significant portions of your professional time to deep, important endeavors, whether that's smithing a sword or optimizing a complex code base, your mind naturally constructs a world rich in meaning, progress, and importance.
That makes perfect sense. By choosing to focus deeply, you are essentially choosing the emotional and intellectual quality of your entire experience.
And there's a crucial defensive mechanism at play here too, isn't there?
There is. Intense concentration naturally hijacks your attention apparatus. When you are truly absorbed in a deep task, you are physically unable to notice the small, irritating, and trivial things that otherwise populate modern life. The scam emails, the passive-aggressive office politics, the minor administrative hassles.
Because the converse is also true. If a workday is driven entirely by the shallow responding to low-value emails, dealing with trivial requests, constantly reacting, your mind constructs a working life dominated by stress, irritation, and triviality.
And that is fundamentally draining.
By cultivating rapt attention through deep work, you leverage the very machinery of your brain to filter out the noise and maximize meaning and satisfaction. Deep work protects your cognitive space.
It does. Which brings us to our second major argument, which is psychological, drawing on the groundbreaking work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and his theory of flow.
Right, the flow state.
Csikszentmihalyi used something called the experience sampling method, or ESM. He gave people beepers, and when the beeper went off, they had to immediately record what they were doing and how they felt.
So it measured their psychological state in real time.
In real time, validating his theory of flow. And flow is defined as that state where a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile.
And the ESM studies, they yielded a truly counterintuitive finding, didn't they?
They did. People consistently reported feeling happiest, most energized, and most engaged when they were experiencing flow. But here's the kicker.
Nah.
They were often experiencing flow at work and reported being less happy, more anxious, and less engaged when they were relaxing at home.
That runs entirely counter to the modern narrative that we live for the weekend and dread Monday morning. So why is work often easier to enjoy than free time?
Because jobs have built-in structures that leisure often lacks. They have clear goals, immediate feedback, specific rules, and significant challenges that naturally encourage deep involvement.
And deep work is the perfect activity to generate flow.
It is. It requires concentration and it pushes cognitive limits. Therefore, engaging in deep work generates happiness and engagement regardless of the specific content of the job.
So the act of going deep orders consciousness in a way that makes life worthwhile, simply because the brain loves to be engaged in a difficult, focused task.
It absolutely does. Which brings us to the third and perhaps broadest argument, the philosophical case for deep work from thinkers like Hubert Dreyfus and Sean Dorrance Kelly.
And they tackle the challenge of finding meaning in the post-Enlightenment world.
They do.
That sounds a little dense. Let's unpack it conversationally. What is the fundamental problem they identify with modernity?
So, since the Enlightenment, the autonomous individual has been tasked with arbitrarily identifying what is meaningful in their life. You are told, go find your passion, go discover your purpose.
Right.
But when you are free to define everything yourself, the sheer weight of possibility and the lack of external reference often leads to confusion, drift, and potential nihilism.
So we're drowning in choices and personal definitions, and that freedom is terrifying. Where do they offer salvation?
They offer craftsmanship. The craftsman, say a master carpenter or a wheelwright, finds meaning outside the self. They don't impose meaning, they discern it.
How so?
They study the inherent subtle virtues of the medium, the grain of the wood, the temper of the steel, and they learn to respond to it with skill. Their task is to cultivate the ability to discern the meanings that are already there.
So the blacksmith Rick Furr isn't deciding that forging a sword is meaningful. He's recognizing the sacredness of the material and the difficulty of the task. And that recognition provides the meaning.
Exactly. The meaning is inherent in the medium, not generated by his arbitrary choice. And this isn't limited to manual trades. Santiago Gonzalez, a renowned computer programmer, articulated this very clearly. He described his work saying, "Beautiful code is short and concise. It's much like as if you were writing a poem."
He's elevating coding, which many would see as mundane knowledge work, to an act of craft.
It is a craft. Whether you're a consultant, a programmer, or a writer, your work is a craft. And if you hone your ability and apply it with respect and care, you generate meaning. The key observation is that cultivating this craftsmanship is necessarily a deep task.
It has to be.
It requires the honing of skills to apply them at an elite level. Deep work transforms a mundane knowledge job from a draining obligation into a deeply satisfying craft, providing a source of meaning that resists the nihilism of modern life.
So all paths, neurological, psychological, philosophical, they all lead back to the connection between depth and true personal meaning. So deep work is valuable, rare, and deeply meaningful. The critical question now is, how do we actually do it? This brings us to the first actionable rule: work deeply. But before we get to the schedules and the philosophies, we have to address the biggest hurdle: the willpower problem.
The willpower problem explains why good intentions almost always fail. We want to be focused, we promise ourselves we'll ignore the inbox, but we constantly cave.
Why?
This is because willpower is a finite, limited resource, like a battery that is depleted by use.
There was a major study confirming this, wasn't there?
There was. A study by Hoffman and Baumeister used the experience sampling method on 205 adults to track their desires and the willpower required to fight them.
And what did they find?
They found that people fight desires, including taking a break from hard work and checking email, all day long. And every time you fight a desire, the willpower battery drains a little bit more.
So if I spend the morning in meetings resisting the urge to check my phone, and then in the afternoon I try to switch into a deep work mode, I've already burned through most of my reserve.
You're forcing yourself to wrestle your attention away from distraction when your willpower is already running on fumes, and you'll most likely fail. Relying on sheer internal discipline is a losing strategy.
The solution then is not to try harder, but to engineer the environment and our routines so that less willpower is required in the first place.
Exactly. The key is implementing meticulous routines and rituals designed to minimize the limited willpower necessary to transition into and maintain a state of unbroken concentration.
We must, in a sense, simulate the theoretical eudaimonia machine.
That's David Duane's idea of a 5-room structure designed solely to enable maximum human flourishing and deep work. We have to do that by structuring our own lives and schedules.
Since there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, a CEO can't structure their day like a novelist. The strategies start with choosing a depth philosophy that fits your specific professional circumstances. Let's start with the most extreme, the monastic philosophy.
The monastic philosophy attempts to maximize deep efforts by eliminating or radically minimizing all shallow obligations. It's for those whose professional value is almost entirely centered on deep production.
The case of Donald Knuth, the computer scientist, is the perfect example here.
It is. Knuth famously refused to have email access since 1990, stating, "What I do takes long hours of studying and uninterruptible concentration."
So how does he communicate?
He goes to the extreme of only handling postal mail, and only in a big batch once every 3 months. He has chosen to ruthlessly exclude any demand for shallow, instantaneous communication because it fragments his life's work.
So if you're an academic, a specialized researcher, or a pure creative whose output is measured in massive singular works, this might work. But what if your job inherently requires collaboration and communication?
Then you need the bimodal philosophy. This divides your time into extended, clearly defined deep stretches and leaves the rest of your time open for everything else. The minimum unit for deep work here is typically a full day because it aims for maximum cognitive intensity.
So you switch between monastic isolation and high availability periods. That sounds like Carl Jung's schedule.
It is the modern version of Jung's method. He would dedicate extended periods, days, or even weeks to his Bollington Tower retreat, acting monastically, but he would return to Zurich for the rest of the time to maintain his busy clinical practice and lecture schedule.
And we saw Adam Grant use this today by batching his teaching into one semester and dedicating the other to research, or taking those 2 to 4 day monastic binges.
The bimodal approach respects the reality of needing shallow work and collaboration, but it ensures enough sustained depth to achieve breakthroughs. Interestingly, a Harvard Business School study on management consultants found that disconnecting for a full day actually improved client deliverables.
Really?
Yes. Proving this bimodal approach is compatible with more jobs than we might assume, as long as the commitment to the deep phase is absolute.
Now let's look at the philosophy for people who can't take days off but need to build momentum consistently. The rhythmic philosophy.
The rhythmic philosophy relies on transforming deep work into a simple, regular habit. You remove all scheduling decisions and thereby conserve your willpower. This is about building a chain of consistency.
Like Jerry Seinfeld's famous don't break the chain method for writing jokes.
Exactly. By setting a simple, regular rhythm, say 90 minutes of deep work every morning at the exact same time, you eliminate the mental energy spent deciding when and where to start. You don't negotiate with yourself, you just execute the habit.
The example of Brian Chappell really drives this home.
Chappelle was a busy doctoral candidate and a father, and he was making glacial progress on his thesis using an ad hoc when I have time schedule.
I think we can all relate to that.
We can. When he switched to a rhythmic method, waking up and starting work by 5:30 a.m. every weekday without exception, he generated thesis chapters at a phenomenal rate. He was using consistency and rhythm to overcome his busy schedule and build massive output, all before his 9-to-5 job even began.
Finally, what about the person whose schedule is genuinely chaotic and unpredictable? The person who has no control over large chunks of their day.
That requires the journalistic philosophy. This means fitting deep work in wherever time allows, rapidly shifting between shallow and deep modes. This is, by far, the hardest philosophy to master.
Walter Isaacson, the famed biographer, is a great example here.
He is. Isaacson wrote his 864-page epic The Wise Men by hammering away at his typewriter in spare 20-minute or 1-hour bursts between his main journalism duties.
So he couldn't clear his calendar.
He couldn't, so he trained himself to drop into deep focus instantly and extract value from these tiny cognitive windows.
That requires incredible confidence in your focus ability because of the risk of that attention residue we talked about.
It does. It is not for the novice. But if you have an unpredictable, demanding schedule, if you're a frontline manager or an author trying to squeeze writing around a teaching schedule and young children, the ability to utilize these spare windows can be a surprisingly robust way to pull off massive amounts of depth over time, provided you practice the transition ritual ruthlessly.
And regardless of the philosophy you choose, monastic, bimodal, rhythmic, or journalistic, you stress the importance of meticulous rituals to support the work.
The ritual minimizes the limited willpower necessary for the transition. Think of Robert Caro, the Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer. He has specific rules for every inch of his office, where he places his books, how he stacks his notebooks, the specific type of paper he uses.
He thinks like an artist, but he works like an accountant.
Exactly. He removes every minor decision point, so his cognitive effort is reserved entirely for the deep task of writing history. Sometimes, supporting deep work requires a go-big mentality, investing in a dedicated space, time away, or specialized resources. The successful deployment of deep work is never accidental. It is ruthlessly engineered through philosophy and ritual.
To bring this all home, we've covered the core arguments of deep work. It is undeniably a valuable skill, crucial for thriving in the modern economy by enabling you to master hard things quickly and produce at an elite level.
It is also a rare skill, not because it's inherently difficult to acquire, but because current workplace culture is undermined by the metric black hole, the ease of the principle of least resistance, and the seductive technopoly Uber ideology, all of which prioritize visible busyness over true value generation.
And most importantly, deep work is profoundly meaningful. Whether you view it through a neurological, psychological, or philosophical lens, dedicating yourself to depth orders your consciousness, provides the satisfaction of engaging in genuine craftsmanship, and protects you from the draining triviality of the shallow.
The source material notes this great historical irony, the Downton Abbey effect, the post-war combination of rapid inflation and aggressive taxation, which wiped out old fortunes based on inherited capital.
Right.
Today, the rewards are reserved not for those who are comfortable just using shallow tools like Facebook or the perpetual inbox, but instead for those who are comfortable building innovative distributed systems, a decidedly deep, hard-to-replicate task that requires real intellectual grit.
So if our attention truly construct our world, as the neurological argument suggests, how much value are you currently assigning to the trivial versus the meaningful in your daily professional life?
And what single distraction, whether it's an app on your phone, a constantly scheduled meeting you know you could avoid, or an immediate email response habit,
Uh,
what's the one thing you could ruthlessly cull today to take the very first concrete step toward living a focused, deep life? That commitment to subtraction, supported by a ritualized philosophy, is the key to thriving.